Hello everyone, welcome to another session of Capital B Talks. Here today with a very special guest, Richard Byworth, who's been a leading voice in Bitcoin and Bitcoin treasury companies all along. So welcome, Richard. The objective is to bring more Bitcoin education all around the world and to bring more Bitcoin treasury company discussion as well in general. And Richard has unique perspectives on the matter, being as well an investor himself and at Seas Capital as well. And so, welcome, Richard. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Alex. Good to see you again.
Nice
I
to
wore my
see you as
suit for
well.
you today.
Exactly. So what's on your radar today for you in Bitcoin? How have you seen the space evolving, and what do you see is striking to you in Bitcoin today?
One of the things that not many people probably know about me is that, as well as my role at Seeds Capital, I do a few other things, and one of them is that I'm an advisor to Jan 3. So I work with Jan 3 on helping explore nation state options for Bitcoin adoption, and there's quite a lot going on at the moment. And as I mentioned to you before, I just got off a 90-minute call with a group of family offices, and they were asking me about Bitcoin adoption and who's really buying Bitcoin. You know, they really didn't understand it. And, you know, what we are seeing is the early steps of real nation state adoption. I can't mention the country that we're working with directly in Central Asia, but my hope is that what we're working on at the moment will lead to a significant bond program that we'd hoped to realize, or I'd hoped to see the team realize in El Salvador. I wasn't involved with that. But what I wanted to see there was a bond program that would allow nation states to understand that with energy grid infrastructure investment backed by Bitcoin, obviously using Bitcoin as the initial user, the seed user into the new energy infrastructure, would allow them to free themselves from IMF debt and ever needing again to be reliant on debt from other countries or people that would, essentially steal their resources. Actually, mining Bitcoin using your own energy is a way to self-sovereignty. And I think many countries need to understand this and the implications. And so what I've been hoping since 2021 is that we see a bond rollout program. And I think that we will be able to achieve this with the Central Asian country that we're working with at the moment, to see the rollout of a bond program that will help them expand their energy grid. Obviously, use that expanded energy grid to do some Bitcoin mining and fund the bonds, as well as potentially buy a decent stack of Bitcoin with a portion of the bonds, much the same way that the bit bonds are designed in the US. So I'm pretty excited about the nation state adoption that will then propagate and lead to. So probably not what you expected me to answer,
Yeah.
but I think it's an avenue that not a lot of people are paying attention to. The nation states are coming. Again, I was talking to someone earlier today and just talking about, they were asking me, do I think that we're going to see another 60 to 90% drawdown in Bitcoin? And I said, I really just cannot see that. Like, the amount of adoption, companies like yours, actively just leveraging the fiat Ponzi through the financial markets to buy more Bitcoin, means that there's just this absolutely unquenchable bid sitting on the bid side of the market. And it was really demonstrated to me 3, 4 weeks ago, where you saw that whale come on a Sunday afternoon in a very deliberate move, sold 29,000 Bitcoin in the space of like an hour. And the market went down 3%. And then they tried it again, same wallet, tried it again the following Sunday, sell 10,000 Bitcoin. The first time Bitcoin went down 3%. Selling 10,000 Bitcoin, trying to force liquidation on a Sunday afternoon, Bitcoin was flat. So, I mean, the bid is just absolutely gargantuan. I mean, in any other prior market, you know, at this sort of phase of the market, that would have caused a significant drawdown and significant liquidations. But I think that we're just at the levels of bids, you know, people need to be buying a significant amount of Bitcoin, right? You've got the Emirati states. I think you're based in Abu Dhabi right now. Obviously, Saudi, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi making moves in this space with mining infrastructure. Obviously, they have a lot of energy, but also just buying the Bitcoin ETFs or buying Bitcoin directly. I mean, all three of those are doing both of those things.
Where do you think the bid is coming from mainly? What do you see around you, around the investors you talk with? You mentioned quite a few of them already in terms of the diversity of them actually. In fact, you know, I guess that 7 years ago, it was a lot of individuals that were convinced about Bitcoin. And now, with a few sentences, you have mentioned the governments and uh, different types of financial institutions and different countries, and it's really a global movement that is happening. So, but in terms of allocation, in terms of size, in terms of significance, where do you see the demand now, and what do you expect over the coming months and years?
Yeah.
Probably first in the shorter term for people.
Yeah, look, I think I'm always very bullish, and I, you know, get sort of fixated on the fact that Bitcoin is finite, and with the amount of demand we're seeing, and even 4 years ago, I was predicting, you know, 175,000 for around 2021 year end, which is why I try and stay away from predictions these days, because you can be off, you know, by quite a lot. But I do think that, you know, it's possible for us to see those sorts of numbers for this year end still. You know, when Bitcoin moves, as we know, it moves aggressively. And there's just this wall of buying that is just soaking up any major clips that are coming out of the whales. And I think the whales are getting wise to it, and they're going, okay, maybe we shouldn't be selling quite so much, right, this time around. Maybe that it can go higher, which is inevitably the point where it does go higher. And so I think 200, 250 by the end of the year is entirely possible. I think that if we get there, we'll sort of likely consolidate for a while. You will start to see more coins come out. And then obviously the dollar value to keep it sustained at that level for the same amount of coins is significantly higher. So this has to be a consideration. So, you know, maybe we'll see a bit of a drawdown, but 80, 60% drawdown, those days, I'm absolutely convinced are behind us. I think, you know, we are in a period where hyper Bitcoinization is beginning. And that means that, you know, this nation state, you know, they've been involved in the space for a while, and they realize that selling their Bitcoin every time they've done it has been a mistake. So now they're open to financing through the fiat markets.
Yeah. Of course, we discussed now a lot of the demand and short-term action that is happening, and that I can see as well. I mean, it's all around is a lot of different players trying to get their hands on Bitcoin and not selling it, in fact. So that's quite impressive. I was in Geneva a few days ago, and
You should have said hi.
Yeah, actually, I met some of your colleagues at CIS, which was a pleasure, and I was with 50 plus asset managers, and I was impressed by the level of interest, even in the discussions that were not related to Bitcoin or digital asset ecosystem. All the questions from the audience were always about and what do you think about the emergence of Bitcoin and digital assets and so on. And so I guess that a lot of this new interest that is coming is also showing that yes, there is short-term opportunities, but this is also due to the realization of many players that were involved from quite some time that are realizing that it is not a short-term play and it is not about a short-term price prediction, and it doesn't matter if you buy the top. In fact, you want to be buying the top forever because there is no top in fiat, because fiat is going to zero. And so in that regard, one of the objectives of these sessions is as well to get back to the roots of what is really Bitcoin and what does it mean for an investor, and how it is also relativizing the volatility that we used to see in Bitcoin, but that now we see more in Bitcoin treasury companies. So I guess that it would be useful for everyone to know maybe your own Bitcoin story and what is important to you in Bitcoin and what you think for someone that just came in would be important to keep in mind when you look at Bitcoin itself, and why you decided to maybe put so much of your efforts on Bitcoin itself first.
That's a huge question, Alex. But yeah, I'll just address one thing that you said right at the beginning, and that is that I think more and more people are realizing this is not a short-term trade. And I think that is a really, really important point for people to understand, is that big allocators are realizing not only do they not need to sell it when it's up 50%, they need to keep buying it and keep accumulating more of it. And I think, I don't think I've told you about this, but we run a fund that's denominated in Bitcoin. We launched it this year to run hedge fund strategies in Bitcoin. Now, I run the dollar version of this fund where we run about $75 million. We've been running it for over 2 years. The Bitcoin fund, I launched it in March. We're over $500 million in that fund already, right? We're targeting a third of the performance that we're targeting in the US dollar fund. But because people to that point are getting to the point like, not only do I need to hold my Bitcoin, I need to get more Bitcoin, right? We target a 5 to max 10% return in Bitcoin. And, honestly, we had it closed for 4 months. I reopened it last month. Had so much demand, we've closed it again. So it's a realization for me as well that people are making that click and saying, if you've been holding Bitcoin for 10 years and you've occasionally sold it here and there to buy a house or to buy a really nice car or whatever it is, every time you've done that, you've regretted it so much. You realize you're never even going to be able to get the Bitcoin back that you paid to pay for a Ferrari or something like that. You just have no chance of ever getting that amount of Bitcoin back, because that was 7 years ago, and you paid 2,000 Bitcoin for it or something insane, whatever it would have been. So there's this realization, as you say, that from people that have held Bitcoin for longer, that actually they just need to hold it and get more Bitcoin. Obviously, the Bitcoin treasury phenomenon is contributing to that as well. But yeah, I think it's a really important point for people to understand. There's this shift of long-term holder mindset of actually, I think a lot of people that got into Bitcoin early probably didn't necessarily understand the implications of Bitcoin. They were like, oh, wow, this is okay. This is a new fun thing. This is really kind of cool. It's a quirky toy, or it's, something that I'll just buy $1,000 just to look at and watch. And now more and more, I think those people are realizing what this is there's this dawning on people, which is, again, propagating that hyper-Bitcoinization moment where you will just sell anything that is not nailed down to try and make sure you get more Bitcoin. So how did I get into Bitcoin? Well, I think that I started my career in investment banking, and I was sort of doing rather well with my career in 2008 and on a nice trajectory. And then the crisis came. And the solution to the crisis was print a gargantuan amount of money. And I was working at Nomura at the time. And I remember I was still pretty young. And I remember going around to all the senior, super smart strategists, FX, strategists, macro strategists, global strategists, and saying, how is this not destroying the value of the money? Like, can you just explain to me how this thing is not just going to see every single fiat currency go to zero? And no one could give me a good explanation as to how this was not going to continue, but also how it was the printing itself would continue. And so I started buying gold. I'd heard about Bitcoin as early as 2010, but I didn't know the very important thing, which was that it is finite and there will only ever be 21 million. And even if someone had told me that, I probably wouldn't have understood how hard-coded and embedded that is into Bitcoin's nature. So I ignored it completely, just kept buying gold, thinking that this is the only thing that I can protect, my work value in. And then in 2017, I read the book Sapiens by Yuval Harari, which is, it's a fairly dark book looking at the future in fairly different ways. And obviously things like AI and the implications of that were covered. And a lot of what he said made sense. Like I could see all of it happening. But he kept talking about this thing, Bitcoin, which I dismissed as a scam back in 2010, 2011, when my young grad in Tokyo was talking about it all the time. And I thought, well, if this guy who, understands, a lot of what the future is going to look like keeps talking about Bitcoin, I should try and understand what this is. So I was still at the bank at the time. It was 2017, early 2017. I'd read it in February. And I got back from my ski trip where I'd read it. And I said to my grad on the desk at the time, I said, look, we should buy some Bitcoin. We should buy Bitcoin for everybody on the desk just to, figure out what this thing is. It was $1,000 at the time. So I thought it'd be a fun experiment for my team. So this was in Hong Kong. And so I then took the summer off. I was in the process of leaving the bank. And so I took a mini sabbatical. And I came back from the summer and Bitcoin had rallied to $3,000. And I said to my little grad, I said, Herman, did you buy the Bitcoin? He said, oh, I thought you were joking. So he never bought the Bitcoin. And I finally thought, okay, I need to work out what this thing is myself. And so I then did the usual mistake of buying Litecoin because it was cheaper. Litecoin did a 5x in 5 weeks. So it was getting into tail end of crazy time in 2017. I was like, what the hell is this industry? And so I ended up joining a crypto company at the end of the year. And it took me about another year to become a Bitcoin maxi. And I've talked about this on a couple of other podcasts, but I had a real problem with my value alignment because I was running a crypto company, but I was a Bitcoin maxi. And so it became very painful for me on a number of levels. I think it affected my health actually, because I just didn't believe in what I was doing. And I really believed in this thing called Bitcoin. And I think when you get to that level, you ask me, why do you now dedicate so much of your time towards Bitcoin? It's like, once you understand that's the most important thing, it's aligning your values with what you do, right, is essentially your truth in the world. And I think it's just super important. And so, I became friends with Jeff Booth a few years back, and he kept saying this. He said, you just need to dedicate as much of your time to Bitcoin as possible. And so I really took him literally at his word. I, joined Jan3 as an advisor. I joined Relay, the Swiss Bitcoin platform, a Bitcoin only platform, as a board member. And obviously I've been very actively involved in the Bitcoin treasury space and just helping people understand. I think education is super important. There's a lot of technical stuff around these companies which I'm well positioned to help people understand. And so, yeah, I feel that it's something that I want to do. I want to help people understand what this amazing asset is and how it can completely transform their lives. I mean, I went from extremely unhealthy, running a company I didn't believe in, and eventually, having a very bad experience with all of that, to now being completely focused on Bitcoin and very aligned with my values and in a very happy place. And yeah, I always say to people, your life gets better when you align with Bitcoin.
Yes, and for someone that maybe has not yet crossed that line in terms of going all in on Bitcoin and realizing the full potential of Bitcoin and why it could make sense to allocate so much time and energy to it, what made it click for you? You mentioned 1 year period or between when you changed with the new company and so on. What was the thing that really changed for you and that made it from a financial asset together with other assets from the ultimate financial asset?
I think, obviously, as I explained with the gold story, I was always already pretty primed for the hardest asset on the planet. I just didn't know it was the hardest asset on the planet. And I think living in that world, I was obviously exposed to it. Back then, sort of early 2018, there wasn't anywhere near the same level of material available that there is today to educate yourself. I mean, I had a call with someone earlier who managed to orange pill himself completely in 5 weeks, which would basically have been impossible back then because it just wasn't, you couldn't find that level of material easily. The one that really got me over the line was, a podcast with Anthony Pompliano, where he was interviewing a guy called Murad, who was, back then he was a Bitcoin max. He went down a bit of a weird route with meme coins. But he went on this podcast, and I remember listening to it. It was in October of 2018, and it was a Friday night. And I remember going to bed, waking up in the morning Saturday and saying, I don't have enough Bitcoin. And that was really the point where it clicked for me. Like, I'd obviously done a lot of work. I'd sort of understood that there's only 21 million. It's a finite app. Understood that it had won the network game already in terms of all the other competing protocols. And yeah, I think that was really the penny drop moment for me, where Bitcoin was trading at about 6,000. I went out and bought a slug at 6,000. I unfortunately didn't have as much money. I'd invested a lot of money into my company, as I would have liked to have had. And then the following month it halved. It went to 3,000. And I think looking back, that was the first time I was really a maxi. I was like, oh, wow, what a great opportunity. I wasn't like, oh shit, I've just lost half my money. It was like, oh, wow, I need to find more money. And so, yeah, that was borrow, beg for money to get as much as I could to buy Bitcoin at 3,000.
So now, as you mentioned, there is this phenomena of Bitcoin treasury companies. You've been very vocal about Bitcoin treasury companies. What is your framework between Bitcoin and Bitcoin treasury companies, and how you see that for you as an investor?
So, yeah, I mean, my Bitcoin treasury journey started because I was trying to help an investor allocate to Bitcoin, and they had a pension in the UK and they weren't allowed to buy Bitcoin ETNs or ETFs. And Michael Saylor announced that he was going to buy Bitcoin on his balance sheet. And I was just like, let's buy this company for you. And so we ended up buying a fairly significant position for him in MicroStrategy. And it was really just forced because, these stupid pension regulations that you have in the UK, Guernsey, Jersey, the rest of it, they don't let you buy things that you want to buy. And so this business intelligence company that popped up putting Bitcoin, I never imagined that he would go to the extremes that he went. It was just, he was putting, I think at the time it was $425 million of Bitcoin on his balance sheet, and he was a $1 billion company. I was like, okay, that is the closest you're going to get to an ETF. And then, of course, watched in real time as Michael himself started to understand the financial engineering that was possible. And went down the road of my favorite product, convertible bonds and straight debt and the ATM and all of this. And so, yeah, I was really following very closely all the way as he went down these paths. And he was kind of just figuring it out. And I think we all were. And then as you sort of realize that there's so much trapped capital in different capital pools across the world, which obviously, Michael's now talking about tapping different fixed income markets globally. There is all this capital trap that can't access Bitcoin. It means that these companies for many years will deserve a premium to the NAV of Bitcoin. And you asked me how I think about them, and you and I have discussed this before. Aggression is super important. Taking advantage of a higher expanded MNAV, for example, to accrete very quickly Bitcoin and make sure that if I'm buying your company at an 8 times MNAV, I'm not going to lose money because you don't do anything and it just deflates all the way back down to 1.5 or 1.2, right? What I want to see is you quickly accrete to 1.5 using ATMs, right? And something you've done very well, 100, MicroStrategy, MetaPlanet, all these companies have done it extremely well in an aggressive manner. And I think that's a really important aspect. I think, you obviously came up with the Bitcoin denominated convertible bonds, which I think is just beautiful. I've been thinking about a few nuances we could make to these structures, which we can discuss offline, which I'm helping a couple of other companies with globally. But I think financial engineering capability is a big one. Like if you are not able to wriggle your way away from a 1 times MNAV, convertible bonds allow you to do that because you're still issuing in a premium, right? Or one of the things that I believe someone asked about, understanding the fact that if you're trading at an MNAV of 0.8, if you sell your Bitcoin and buy your shares back, you're accreting more Bitcoin per share to your shareholders. So understanding these things, right? And I think that, there's a lot of Twitter noise about, and I'm not going to ask you to comment because obviously it's difficult for you to do.
Anyway.
Please do then. But I think that if people don't understand that nuance or get sort of religious about you never sell your Bitcoin, I think that's a slightly worrisome construct. And I think, this is a Bitcoin per share accumulation game. This is why these companies are different to an ETF, right? You don't buy BlackRock's Bitcoin ETF because they've got 600,000 Bitcoin, right? You buy it because you can get an LTV against it or whatever, and it's essentially Bitcoin. The reason that you buy a Bitcoin treasury company is because they can accrete more value, and that's why they deserve, they can accrete more Bitcoin per share, and that's why they deserve a premium over MNAV. Now, there is a debate to say that at a certain size and scale, you want as much Bitcoin as possible because that's your collateral base for your preference share base or your fixed income base. But I think that, if you're looking like a company like Thick1s who are trading at, I don't know where they are today, but last time I looked at them, they were trading at a 0.8 times MNAV. It wouldn't take an enormous amount. They've only got 3,000 Bitcoin anyway. It wouldn't take an enormous amount for them to just go and reverse that completely. But I think so long as the market understands that you're not a shitty grayscale ETF to the downside, you can trade at a big discount, then you won't trade at a discount. Market needs to understand this. And so it needs to understand that the management will make that move. So those are my thoughts.
Well, I guess that we do have a bit of a disagreement on this last aspect, not on the potential opportunity of a share buyback in and of itself. I think that's an option that is on the table for a company to definitely defend the MNAV and have a great value for shareholders. However, the buy selling Bitcoin is the piece where I'm not there because of the certainty of the loss in value of Bitcoin when you sell it, uncertainty of being able to get it back because you cannot control what Bitcoin does, and you could get a fraction maybe, but you're not sure about. You mentioned it. When you sell Bitcoin, typically you will regret at some point in time. Then an operational company can get into big troubles and have to sell if that is the ultimate recourse to not be completely dissolved. But I think that this is quite an important principle for a Bitcoin treasury company as well, compared with a fund or an ETF as well, because a fund and an ETF has redemptions and then will sell Bitcoin as well. And so in this context, the Bitcoin treasury company is also differentiated in the intention to never sell the Bitcoin. Well, Michael will put it much quicker. He will put a post on X and say, keep the Bitcoin. But I would say that the optionality for an operational company to have a share buyback in case of a negative MNAV is quite an important option to have for the company. Then where I would slightly go in a different route is what are the other means to finance this instead of being selling Bitcoin, because that is the last thing that a Bitcoin treasury company would want to do. Not like you could take religious reasons as well, but even if you take apart the pure principled Bitcoin maximalist approach, because of the reason that each capital operation of a Bitcoin treasury company should allow for both, of course, the sats per share increase. So definitely you don't want to be blocked in a situation where you cannot do anything during 3 years because you are trading at a discount. But first, that is easy for a company that has tools in terms of issuance of converts at a premium and BTC denominated ones and so on. But a company that doesn't have these tools, then it might be more difficult as well. So there I understand as well your point in terms of what are the actual options of the company. But still, then when you sell the Bitcoin, in fact, you are reducing your future capacity as well to issue more accretive securities too. You could argue that you are increasing your capacity if the market is reacting as well to this buying pressure in a good way, because you could be buying back your shares and the shares go down. Because some short sellers, they have pockets that are larger than what some of us could imagine, because they have made so much money over the last 3 months by shorting a lot of shares that yes, they can be completely blown out because of Bitcoin itself and because of the corporate action of the company. But that's where, I would not say no to the share buyback, but I would say definitely no to the buy selling Bitcoin piece, which is where what's your thinking there to be that assertive in the topic?
Yeah, look, I'm not saying that you should just immediately do it despite other options. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that is the extreme you should go to break the short sellers, right? Because short sellers will go as far as they can. If they think they can kill you dead on the pavement, they will go there, right? So the point is, you need to reverse that trend, right? And so it's very important that you are able to buy back those shares. Now, I agree with you. Selling the Bitcoin is the last resort, but you should still do it, right? If it's the last resort, you should still do it. Because look what's happened to Sequans. Not only have they sat for 2 months almost at a 0.8 times MNAV, where's the accretion for shareholders? You're talking about basically, I don't know if I'll be able to get the Bitcoin back. If they'd reversed that 2 months ago with a simple sale of Bitcoin and buyback of shares, not only would they have gone back to a 1 times MNAV, the market would probably have attributed them a premium where they could start stacking again just from simple ATMs, right? But also, once they get back to a 1 times MNAV, they're in a healthier place, right? You're much more likely to be able to get a convertible bond out the door if you're in a healthy place. When you're on your knees with the short sellers absolutely destroying you, your options are limited, right? And I think that you need to be able to show practically that you're going to reverse the trend no matter what. I think if you just sit there and let the market do whatever it is that it's going to do to you, as we've seen with Sequans as a good example, then unfortunately you sit there, you don't accrete any Bitcoin to your investors. And that's the important thing, right? At the end of the day, right? They could have accreted Bitcoin with that 0.8 times MNAV by selling Bitcoin and buying their shares back. So that's accretive to Bitcoin per share. But then as a result of that, they probably would have ended up getting awarded a premium to MNAV, right? And so then they can start going again. I'm repeating myself, but I really want to underline this point that it's really, really important with these things. We know it, right? It's a sentiment game, right? When you and I were last together in Prague, I think your company was an 8 times MNAV or a 7 times MNAV, and today you're what, like a 1.25,
5. No,
1.3?
1.56 now, yeah.
Okay, maybe I was looking at a different chart. But yeah, I mean, it's a sentiment game. You know, back then it was different sentiment, and you were doing exactly the right thing. You were just issuing, buying as much Bitcoin as possible to take advantage of that extended MNAV, so that your investors that were buying were not getting into a situation where they were buying too high, and then the stock, if the MNAV declined away from accretion, would end up, you know, with a heavy loss for them.
I guess we will not be able to come to the agreement.
No, but okay, let
on
me
the
ask.
matter.
Maybe you don't
But
want me to
yeah,
ask you this question, but let's say debt markets are closed to you, you're too leveraged, right? No one wants your converts, right? Because your credit is scaring them a bit because they think MNAV could go to 0.2, 0.1. So like, no, I don't like this at all. Would you then consider selling Bitcoin to buy back your shares? It's your last option. It's your last hope, because right now you're not accreting any value. Or do you just sit there and say, Bitcoin's going up forever, I'm not going to do anything?
you never sell your Bitcoin, Richard. Um, so that's the answer, and I think the ability to have this answer is first the maturity of the past financial instruments that you would have issued. So that's why we've been very cautious to issue financial instruments with a 5-year maturity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And not lower, which could put the company, if you have 6 months, 1 month maturity, and you have to pay back something that you can't, and that's not a good position to be in. I don't want to
Okay,
be
so
watching, you see? Yeah, so
for you, to
it's
some
like,
degree, you already have a leverage ratio. Not
well,
issue, but you're
well,
heavy.
we don't have fiat debt, for the Bitcoin treasury company. So in that respect,
You have
it is
Bitcoin.
only BTC denominated, and it
Yeah.
is over 5 years. So
Okay.
in that respect, only the increase of the value of the Bitcoin, then if you believe that Bitcoin is going to zero is different. But if Bitcoin follows its slight trend from, even if you would take 20, 30%, only this could have the conversion of the convertible bonds by itself if the company keeps just doing its thing. So then
I'm
you
with
could
you. I
argue
see
that
your issue.
yes, you could have a period of time where you would have 1 year or 2 year market in terms of capital markets that is very bad. At the same time, you see that if you give yourself enough time, even if the company is not in a very good position in terms of negotiating power, with enough time, Bitcoin works for you, and the shorts could have to close their positions just by the movement of Bitcoin itself, or for other external factors, or other corporate actions. Because I would think that within a couple of months or a year, a Bitcoin treasury company with the capital markets experience would be able to find right partners to reverse the situation, as you mentioned, but in a way that would not involve the selling of Bitcoin. But there I would come to the second condition for this, is the actual conservative management of the traditional short to medium term treasury of the company. So if you have, as a company, a lot of costs that you are not able to cover, and then you have to do something, then in this position, then you are not in a good position, and you might have to go to a last resort route, you know. But if you make sure that the company is able to continue its normal operations over a period of 1 year to 2 years without raising new capital, then you are in a different position to be able to take the time necessary to do an even better capital market operation than to have something that would be uncertain. I'm not saying that what you describe could not work in finance. In fact, you know, from a theoretical perspective, I can understand why you say that people need to understand it, because from a pure mathematical perspective, it is logical. But what is not logical as well is that if you lower the value of the Bitcoin on the balance sheet, which can be the certain thing that happen if you sell it, at the same time you are not sure, it is a probability, but you are not sure of the share price going up, because you could be selling Bitcoin and then Bitcoin does minus 20%. And what will the share price do after you bought it and the price of Bitcoin that you have on your balance sheet goes by minus 20%? It is quite probable that the share price will go down because it's a Bitcoin treasury. So you see, but if you, and then it depends on the context of the company. So I can also understand the context of a sequence potentially, but if you would take down the Bitcoin on the balance sheet, then if you have issued other financial instruments that have a conversion, that you would lower the probability of the conversion, because you would need then more percentage of growth of Bitcoin for a conversion of the convertible notes to happen without even doing any corporate action.
Actually that's wrong, because you get more Bitcoin per share.
Yeah, you could get more Bitcoin per share.
You do get more Bitcoin per share.
Yeah. So
your convertibility likelihood on a reversal, your convertibility likelihood actually increases.
That's correct, taking the assumption that more Bitcoin per share increases the share price, which is correct. It's one factor, but there is also the factor of the size of the balance sheet as well. So it's like you could argue that net the probability could be the same with this, but there is one that takes an assumption, which is what is the effect of the share buyback in the price. And so
I hear
you
what you're
think,
saying, that
yeah,
the scale of the share buyback has to be big enough to make sure that everybody trying to short it down to zero point 0.5 times MNAV gets murdered, right? And that's the sort of game you're playing. It's a game of chicken, right? And I think there's always a point where you will win that game, right? Because the shorts need to borrow the shares to short them, right? And that's the point that I'm making. And if you show the shorts that they won't win that game, they won't do it again. That's the point.
it's a clear position. So that was, I think, it was quite important to have this discussion. We've had this question from the audience, so I guess now you heard both views, and everyone can form its own opinion. You mentioned something very interesting. It was all the different options that you can go through before going to that type of option. What is, in your view, the range of different tools that are the most interesting in your view? The preferred, the fiat convert, the BTC convert. Do you see any other instruments that is underexploited? You mentioned the different capital pools that need to be addressed. We keep talking about capital pools, but actually you need to be very specific about targeting those. They have specific mandate. You need to check a lot of boxes, and
Yeah.
before going to the hundreds of trillions of capital pools, what instruments do you think would be the most pertinent to address the most adapted capital pools at first hand?
It depends on the company. It depends on the profile of the company, the size of the company, where the MNAV is. If you've got a positive MNAV where you can be running an ATM daily, then you should be doing put underwriting on Bitcoin, non-cash collateralized. Well, not you should. An option is there for you to do it. And obviously, Metaplanet to date are the only company that have done this actively. And I think it's a really nice program that is underutilized by the market. I think it's a very, very smart thing, because if you think about it, you know you're always buying Bitcoin. So long as you've got that premium to NAV, you're running an ATM of some construct. With Metaplanet, it's the moving strike warrants, which is the synthetic ATM. If you've got one of those running and your MNAV is high enough, then you know you're always buying Bitcoin, which means sell the put to be able to buy Bitcoin at whatever price it is today. You need to do it anyway. You need to buy Bitcoin. So why not get a premium to do so? So I think that's something that's slightly underutilized. To your point about capital pools, I think the reason that Saylor has been the only one to really be able to do this and design different press for different people and the rest of it is just because of his size. He is obviously, I don't know what he is today in terms of market cap, but 100 billion or thereabouts, right? That's a meaningful market cap where you can play around in these markets and you can do size issuances. I think it's a lot harder when you're not so large to be able to be playing in those markets and providing different options to the different, buyers of those products. I would say fiat convertible bonds are interesting, also underutilized because of the bad experience that Strategy had. And why did they have a bad experience? Because a lot of the people that bought those convertible bonds are hedge funds. And so they're just constantly shorting their stock when it goes up. So they're providing this additional weight on the stock to the ATM, which really you want the ATM to be purely for you. You don't want anyone else shorting your stock. I think, this is something I used to run convertible bond deals in the investment bank. And we did have corporates that would come and say, I don't want that investor in my bond. I don't want that investor in my bond. And they would be very specific. So I think that there is an avenue for Bitcoin treasury companies to go down the route of saying, I want my bond to be entirely allocated to outright convertible bond managers. Now, of course, there will come a time where they get into the hands of hedgers, but it won't happen immediately.
Interesting. Is there anything that you've seen in Bitcoin treasuries recently that you think doesn't get enough attention or that sparked your interest?
It's a good question. I think I was very impressed when I interviewed Sander at H100 with the way that he's just tapping not different capital pools, but different investors. Like he's bringing an entirely new investor base into this space through his very interesting investor sourcing platform, FinPeers. And of course, the priority of their focus has been H100. In this type of market environment, no one wants to buy anything. So that's sort of not working so well. But for a while, it was working extremely well. So that really impressed me about Sander and H100. I've always told you and everybody that I think your innovation with the Bitcoin denominated convertible bonds was an exceptional one, something very much needed for the market. Metaplanet I'm very fond of because of the fact that they do this put underwriting program, and I don't know if you saw the numbers that came out of that. They're meaningful numbers, tens of millions of dollars and being generated by their put underwriting program every quarter. So yeah, I think, and obviously of course strategy leading the way. I think those are always the companies that I think of when I think about leaders in the space.
And well, thank you so much. And outside of Bitcoin treasuries, is there, because, and I think it would be helpful for people to know what's your role at SEAS and what's the range of things that you do, and is there anything as well around Bitcoin treasury companies that you observe that are around Bitcoin and Bitcoin capital markets, new products, and how do you see if there will be a form of junction at some point between the two?
Yeah, I think there's a very logical one, and that is obviously I run the hedge fund business here at Seas Capital. We run about $1.8 billion in hedge funds, and of that, 600 million is allocated to crypto hedge funds, with 500 of that being denominated in Bitcoin to provide a very low risk, low volatility return in Bitcoin. We seek between 5 and 10%. We're landing at the moment, we've been running for 7 months, we're landing at about 5%. I see these types of strategies as tools for Bitcoin treasury companies in the future to put their stack to work and make sure that they get some very low risk returns in Bitcoin. I think that's where probably my two worlds are intersecting a little bit. I think that we'll start to see a few of the BTCTCs allocate to that product or a product like that. So I think that'll be interesting. I've also been thinking, and this is relevant to your convertible bonds, about creating a Bitcoin denominated fund that invests in those convertible bonds, because again, you're looking at either getting your Bitcoin back or getting a 20% or 15% return in Bitcoin through essentially converting into your shares and reconverting back into Bitcoin. So I think that is potentially another avenue that I could take things at Seas Capital at some point in the future. Because we have a lot of Bitcoin investors now that are trying to get more of a return on Bitcoin. So I think that's going to be something with the space in general, that you're going to see more and more credible, sensible investors implement these sort of low risk return strategies to provide some sort of return on Bitcoin. Because right now, many of these companies are just sitting on a huge stack of Bitcoin.
Very interesting. We are coming to an end. So what would be your message to Capital B shareholders that are listening a lot to these sessions. What do you think would be helpful for them?
Well, if they're already shareholders, I would say they're invested in probably one of the most financially innovative BTCTCs. And so they've made a great choice. I think, I made a post about Metaplanet the other day, but the same applies to you at a 1.5 times MNAV. You know, there's very little downside now. And I think, you know, we've obviously had a little debate about what happens at a negative or less than one MNAV. I think that you will use all the tools that you're available potential to make sure that doesn't happen, which means you're essentially floored at 1 times MNAV. And then if we look at where this whole space is going, and you being one of the most financially innovative companies in the space, I think that when things start to turn, sentiment shifts back again, you'll see one of the biggest upsides. So I would say sit with it, hodl, and as well as never selling your Bitcoin, don't sell your capital Bs.
That's a great message. Where can people find you, Richard? Is there any message you would like to send as well? Key areas that you think would be helpful for you, for people to reach out and so on?
Look, I really appreciate it when people reach out on this type of stuff and this debate, and we can sort of discuss these things. And I've definitely nuanced my thinking around the 1 times MNAV. I think that everybody should engage. I'm on Twitter. I love to engage with people making sensible points and arguments. So it's at Richard Byworth. Very simply, there's lots of scam accounts out there replicating, so just make sure it's spelled correctly. Yeah, I think that we're all sort of learning about this space together. We're not entirely sure where things are going to go, but we all understand that it's going higher. And so I think, I really want to just help people understand the opportunity and educate, not just on Bitcoin treasuries, but also on Bitcoin. I just think it's such an important thing for people.
Thank you so much, Richard, and we'll be happy to have you on again soon, hopefully, and talk soon as well. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers.